Don't forget to engage with us on social media using the Equity 2021 at MODHEWD at our new conference site. And so with that being said, I can hand it over to our presenters. Whenever you guys are ready, all set.
Good morning. My name is Warren Haynes, and Metropolitan Community College is happy to be a part of this presentation. So we have a diverse group of presenters. We have our Chancellor, Dr. Kimberly Beatty. We have two of our faculty members. Antwan Daniels is one of our STEM faculty. Cynthia Heddlesten is our liberal arts faculty. And then we have our institutional research team on here as well. So we will get started with the Chancellor Beatty giving a overview in terms of how we arrived at this space in terms of our historical lens.
Thank you, Warren and Dr. Haynes. I'm so glad to be here with all of you and glad to be able to share the work that truly we're just beginning and share with you a little bit of that journey. So from an historical perspective, we first began in this journey in linking the equity work into our strategic plan. So equity was one of the primary anchors and themes in our strategic plan. And we developed in the next year an Office of Institutional Equity and Inclusion. And it was connected with Title IX, which we realized may not be the best approach because Title IX is always going to take priority over the equity work, given that Title IX is more of a compliance issue. And so after experiencing that, we moved into breaking off, and Dr. Haynes was hired recently as the Vice President, district-wide Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. But during that time frame, it took us a little while to learn, and quite frankly, is the reason why we're just now launching and moving into this work, because I don't want to say lost time, but we learned lessons in that time frame in terms of how equity coupled with Title IX, it takes more time because of the Title IX piece. But that executive director was hired. We started moving towards some of that work, and we did a number of assessments and surveys. Now, it's important for me as a part of this historical lens to say that there had been a focus on equity a long time before I came along. It's happening in pieces, in good pieces and in good spots where faculty were doing innovative things with their classes. There was programming that was in place that was moving the agenda along. What my goal and what I hope you'll see is a more intentional and comprehensive approach and bringing all of those efforts together to move our equity agenda forward.
So as the Chancellor mentioned, as we moved forward in our equity space, we tried to align our strategic plan. When the Chancellor came in 2017, she kind of took a look at that. New strategic plan was developed. And then we had a strategic theme aligned with that strategic plan up here. So down where our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion lies, we have all of our campuses that cascade up and down. So we have our Blue River, Business Technology, Longview, Maple Woods, Penn Valley, and online campus. So ideally, all of these units should cascade back up into the strategic plan and align with our strategic theme as we work through this diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So we wanted to give you a visual of our current state. Our Chancellor, Dr. Beatty, mentioned the decoupling that went on. So if you look at our Office of Civil Rights, which would be overseen by a Civil Rights Administrator, you have these Title IX and compliance scenarios that would fall under that umbrella. And then you have the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, where we have these pieces as well. As we look toward the path forward, our chancellor is going to delve into the equity-centered framework for us and give you an idea of how we're approaching moving this DEI space along at Metropolitan Community College. You might be on mute,
This is
Dr. Beatty.
really an implementation plan for moving forward that is Cotter's leading change with the AACC leadership competencies included. And if you start at the top with creating a sense of urgency, that is the first step in Cotter's leading change. And then through the existing organizational culture is an aspect of the AACC leadership competencies. So you kind of move through this because developing an equity or implementing an equity agenda is a change for most of our institutions. And if you're finding yourself with looking for a practical approach to how you can lead through that change, this is a model that we're going to put in place to take us, or that we are putting in place to take us through that process. I won't walk through all of those. I presume these presentations will be available on some site, but we're using data to create that sense of urgency. We're in the process of identifying our key stakeholders that we want to have engaged, and then we work as a team with engagement to get through these other steps.
So as we consider the framework that Dr. Beatty mentioned, we're looking and examining our infrastructure. So we had some assessments and we're analyzing some of the data. We've had a climate study, for example, and we're looking at that data and sharing that out with our campus community. We're undergoing a series of district-wide charrettes. So on our 6 campuses, we're having some face-to-face and some virtual, so that we can try to assess from our stakeholder perspective, our campus community, our students, our faculty, and our staff, what DEI should look like and what have been your experiences regarding this diversity, equity, and inclusion space. We've also adopted some campus themes. So for example, one campus might have unconscious bias, another campus might focus on microaggressions. So as we look at our district-wide ecosystem, each campus has a theme that they're working on in terms of this DEI space. We've also undergone and had a faculty equity institute over the summer, where a cohort of our faculty are looking at how we might improve our equity outcomes in the classroom. So that might be in terms of looking at our pedagogy, looking at our syllabi and how that might be viewed from an equity lens. And then we've had a cohort of faculty, staff, and administrators participate in the Garner Institute. So as we look at our timeline for our first year, we've had several things that have been accomplished over the summer. We've identified our themes. We've identified our district council members. So we have a diversity, equity, inclusion council. We've engaged with our supplier diversity team, engaged with some of our affinity groups. We completed the Faculty Institute, completed the Garner Institute, and we're exploring some external partnerships. This fall, we look to conduct our charrettes regarding diversity, equity, inclusion. So we're about halfway through of that. We are examining the findings of the climate study that I mentioned earlier. We're looking to promote some of our DEI initiatives. So one example is us participating in this conference where we're sharing best practices, learning about best practices from our colleagues and figuring out how we can partner and implement some of these DEI spaces. And then we're looking and promoting some of our training and professional development as it relates to this diversity, equity, inclusion umbrella. In the spring, after we have our charrettes and other activities, we look to conduct some vision exercises. So after everything is said and done during this first phase of our implementation, what would be the vision for our institution based on our conversations, based on looking at the data, based on some of the surveys? Where do we see MCC at in terms of our vision? And then we look to enhance our DEI staff. So one example, we have work study students, for example. Should we pull in some work study students to work with us and move with our student population? They have direct kind of communication daily with their classmates. So how do we kind of look at that? Do we consider a diversity fellow, someone that has experience in a specific DEI lens to kind of come in? We also have our faculty interns, which a faculty member from our institution works with our diversity, equity, inclusion office to increase our DEI space and activities. Then we're looking to determine if we need some expansion in our affinity group. So we have an Hispanic, an African American, LGBT, and a women's affinity group. Do we need to expand that, or how do we want to make some adjustments? So right now, I'm going to have Antwan Daniels kind of talk about the faculty academy that I mentioned earlier. But before he does that, I wanted to share a few comments regarding the qualitative data. As a cohort of faculty went through this program, we did a survey, and here are some of the comments from that. You absolutely leave this training with a more concrete idea of how to begin tackling issues of equity and inclusion in the classroom. The best part of this work is that you turn knowledge into action. I also appreciated that at times there are no right answers to case studies and discussion issues, but rather modeling a practice of reflection and questioning with more equity in mind. I'll just read one more, and then we'll have these PowerPoint presentations for you to share. The knowledge is valuable and will lead to greater awareness and action that suggests improved outcomes for all of our students. So with that, I'll take that back to Professor Daniels.
Greetings. Thank you for that. We've had a great time. We can do this only because we have a brave and vulnerable leadership in Dr. Beatty. She's being intentional and explicit about what must be the changes and the growth we have to make it into. We're either growing or we're going in one way or the other. And so in the process, we took on 20 people who were volunteered during the summer to step into a room where they can be vulnerable at, be to the point, be uncomfortable, and be all right with being uncomfortable. And we was led by Dr. Kofi from California, and he brought us in, and we went through training that was not just a train necessarily. We had to leave there with a action plan, with something that we could see and embrace and say, where do I see myself at, and how can I do more? One big thing I will say from this was our lens. Our lens matters. We have to be aware of our lens of how we see students, but also how we serve students. And in that process, we gained many skill sets of just deficit-based language versus strength-based language. Excuse me. One thing was the term at risk. It may be a deficit-based thinking instead of saying high touch students, the ones we need to reach out more and be more engaged with, instead of saying at risk. Another term is saying underprepared is a deficit mindset, instead of saying a strength-based mindset would be underserved. And so we can start thinking about how we can change our lens, and with that lens change, you will change your thinking, your actions, and your outcomes, hopefully in a positive way. And so now we also delved into the fact that we were shown how sometimes data can be used as a tool or a weapon. And we were given a case studies of where the science was being shown, and then how people will sometimes have that initial what's the word I want to say, that initial, that's not us. But when you really are doing what Dr. Beatty is training us into, is to embrace that, say, this is me, but I'm not this, I'm not going to be this next year or a year later or 2 years. We understand that growth is necessary. Some of my colleagues took on things such as in graphic design. She says that the minority students who graduate with an AAS degree from Metropolitan have lower outcomes as far as work-based work and finding next level programs. So she's trying to make sure that she secures funds for organization uh, usage, but also fees for memberships for these underrepresented groups, and to help them branch out more in the workforce. Another is in psychology. They saw that they decided in psychology 140, every professor, not just full-time, but adjuncts, every professor will be trained in the use of the Urban Education 2017 Syllabus Review Guide for equity-minded practice. That is game changing. When you take on that many, a class that takes on 1,000 students about every year and a half or so, and you can say that we're going to look at our syllabus and we're going to see how we can make modifications that will see our students. That's one of the key things is we have to not try to be colorblind. We can't say park the ski at the door. We have to understand when you say that, you are removing a vital skill and you are challenging someone to not be what they are. And that is not a way to grow. That's a way to go somewhere else. Okay. And so
All
now,
right. So we're going to leave some
yes.
time for Q&A for Professor Daniels at the end and move on to the Garner Institute. We have our one of our professors, Cynthia Heddlesten, to kind of give a overview of the Garner Institute and what that group learned and how we're using that to implement this DEI space here at Metropolitan Community College.
Thank you, Dr. Haynes. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. So I was first asked to be part of the Garner Institute last summer, and I will admit I was very hesitant to do so. I, like many of you, have been doing work in the area of equity and inclusion for over 20 years, and I thought it was just going to be another training, another workshop, and I was well past that phase in my work. I wanted real, sustainable action to be taken. Little did I know that Garner was definitely going to take me down that road with my colleagues. We did a very deep dive into literature, into best practices. We worked amongst ourselves. We worked with other institutions. We looked at retention, completion, and transfer data. We spent pretty much all day, every day for a week just diving into the weeds of our institution, the history of our city, the history of our college, policies and practices, what everything was looked at. And one of my favorite experiences in that was a day when we just decided that we weren't going, one of our meetings, we weren't going to do the agenda for the day. We were just going to talk about our fears with this work. And we all had just a very open, very real, authentic conversation about, we're doing all this work. Is this going to end up being like so many other initiatives? And I'm pleased to say it absolutely was not. The data we found was very eye-opening. It was shared during our in-service this year. It has definitely created a sense of urgency among our many campuses and faculty and staff. We're starting to bring a lot of pieces together. One of the things that we were tasked with is to create a plan to plan. And again, at first I was kind of like, what's the point of that? But then I realized it was very critical because we had so many pieces going on at once. And this is really the perfect time at our institution to be doing this kind of work. People are coming back to campus energized. They care about these issues. They want to do real action. And so we're seeing this real implementation and things that are happening. So our plan to plan has actually now become the plan, and we're seeing it actually implemented, and that's great. We've been able to build coalitions. We've been able to always have in our forefront are what we call our equity groups. Our equity groups are through data and through research, quantitative and qualitative. We were able to identify our groups that were invisible to us, the ones that were not necessarily seen. We've discovered that our part-time students, and especially our part-time students that are dealing with other marginalized characteristics such as race or social class, are really struggling in our institution. And that has shifted our entire perspective of how we're approaching student services, how are we approaching advising, how are we approaching instruction, because suddenly our invisible group is visible and they're at the forefront of our mind. And that has really changed so much about what we're doing. Dr. Haynes?
Great. So we're going to toss this over to our institutional research team. So Melissa Giese, we're also looking at, as Professor Heddlesten suggested, both qualitative and quantitative data. So Melissa, will you kind of walk us through how we're utilizing our institutional research in terms of our equity space?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Haynes. And Cynthia, thank you for, you did a great job of kind of explaining where we're at and some of the data. So this slide really is an example of one of the pieces of data that my office shared to really start looking at the equity gaps and to create that sense of urgency that Dr. Beatty and Dr. Haynes and Dr. Heddlesten mentioned. And so when we disaggregated the data, which is important and really the first important step of this work so that you can see these different gaps, we noticed that our Black and African American students were not as successful in their 3-year completion rates compared to our white students. In fact, there was a 20% difference there. And then our Hispanic students were their completion rates were about 10% lower than our white students. So that was one big eye-opening piece. In addition to that, when I look at the data and we shared it, you can see that our white students have been increasing in their 3-year completion rates over the past 4 years. And when you look at the trends by the different groups, you see that that's not the case for our Black and African American students. It's remained relatively flat for their 3-year completion rate. And our Hispanic students have shown, a little bit of increase, but not nearly the same as the 11% increase that we see with our white students. So this is just one example of a piece of data that, as Cynthia mentioned, Dr. Beatty shared this at our in-service so that the entire institution could see it. And then it's been shared with our board of trustees. And so getting this data out there has been great to really start these conversations. And I've had a lot of feedback where people are asking for more of this data. So really for my office, our next step is to continue disaggregating the data. We have a lot more data that we can dig deeper into and share as well, so that we can have these conversations and be very informed in coming up with a plan for improvement in these different areas for our students.
Great.
Thank you.
So Melissa mentioned some of the work that is going on with our board as we reimagine MCC. So I'm going to toss this back over to our chancellor to kind of talk about our new strategic plan and maybe some of the changes that were made in our language. Dr. Beatty?
Yes, thank you. Our strategic plan is going to be a 10-year plan that'll be updated annually, operationalized annually, and then revisited in 5 years just to make sure that the goals are still relevant. But as is the case at all institutions and should be the responsibility of our boards, is to look at the mission and vision. And so our board met at their board retreat and decided to make some modifications to our vision. And you'll notice that one of the things that was implied, especially in our HLC visit, was that there wasn't equity or an inclusive lens that was implied in preparing students, serving communities, and creating opportunities. But we wanted to make that, again, with some intentionality, very clear. So we added the for all. And then the vision, we wanted to change to make sure that all students were encouraged again. And that this spoke more to the students and our community in our previous vision, which I was a part of crafting, what we have to realize in these documents is that they might, MCC will be a high performing institution that's learning centered. That's our speak, but it doesn't necessarily speak to the masses. So we wanted to modify the vision so that it spoke to the masses.
So as Dr. Beatty mentioned, there was some conversation with our board, and if you look at our value statement now, we have excellence, learning, equity, people, and integrity. But if you notice that equity piece there, it says our institutional infrastructure fosters equity in employment and student learning and eliminates barriers to success for anyone. Dr. Beatty, did you want to elaborate any on this conversation at all?
There was just that we did a lot of broad external and internal input to come up with these value statements, because after being here, I'm in my 5th year now, we realized that we did not as an institution have value statements. These are statements that we now will be able to link in a number of different mechanisms that are systemized, if I can create a word, or systemic through the institution, and post them everywhere so that not only internally, but externally, as people come on our campuses, they understand that these are the values that we have and that we hold our institution, everyone here, accountable for each one of these values through systems that already exist.
And finally, we have these strategic themes. So we have emerge, evolve, embrace all, and elevate. So before we take our questions and discussions, Dr. Beatty, if you wanted to just mention anything about this, and then we can go into Q&A.
I recently at In-Service, which we have about 850 employees and full-time employees, and probably nearly 1,000 part-time employees when you include adjunct faculty. And In-Service is available for all of those employees. And this year I did, I took an hour at least to do a live Q&A. And one of the things that was asked was, how is equity woven into the strategic plan? And I reminded them that one of our strategic themes is embrace all. One of our institutional values is equity. And so I just share that to say that we are making sure that this is woven through, and the folks on the co-presenting with me know that our strategic plan is not just one we create and it sits on the shelf. We have an institutional effectiveness loop where the tactics that support these goals that we develop have to be measured. They're entered, we close the loop, we do process improvement. And I'm real proud of the fact that we had 100% compliance with our institutional effectiveness loop. So we're making sure that not only that we have a strategic plan that says it, but that we actually walk the talk and that we measure it as well.
Great. So we will open it up for Q&A. I think we're right on time, so we'll open the floor up.
Yep, we have just about like 5 minutes before the next set. Well, the next session starts at 11:10, so we can take a few minutes for Q&A. So put your questions through the chat. I just want to say thank you for our presenters as well.
Thank you for having us. So will you be reading the chat? I can't see it on my end.
Oh yeah, I can read the chat. Nothing yet, but we'll give them a minute to talk up their questions.
Well, it looks like we were thorough. Oh, there we go.
Okay, I'll read these off. Perfect. Yep. Just it takes a second to type. The first question we have is, are there strategic steps that MCC is taking to elevate equity?
Yeah, I'll address that. First, we had to put in place an infrastructure in creating the office and the position of the equity and inclusion, which we have done. Dr. Haynes is working on developing, we're moving through that implementation strategy where we will then have a equity vision for the institution and do some visioning exercises. We took the first step with our climate study. I shared those results at in-service. Now we're going to have conversations on the campuses to kind of peel back the onion on some of the things that we discovered were not easy to digest, but we need to talk through and have some courageous conversations. This is a heavy lift for anyone that's planning to do it. It takes time, a lot of time. So just be prepared for that.
I have a second question. How can we get leadership to be more vulnerable?
I don't know. I don't have an answer to that because I'm super vulnerable. I'm an open book, but I don't know. Does somebody else
I was
have?
going to say that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I know that those leaders exist, but that's my perspective. I don't know if anybody else on the team has a different perspective. I don't know how to, that's just how I'm an authentic person, and I hope to work with authentic people, and just comes with who people are.
I'm happy to kind of talk about that a little bit too. MCC, we do have a culture of shared governance here. And so when we hire like our chancellors and our presidents, that's a process that staff and faculty and administration are all on. They all have contributions. And I remember when our chancellor applied for the position, she went to different campuses and did presentations, and we all got to see her. So it really fell on us to make sure we selected a candidate that shared our vision and our mission for us. And so that was really where it came down to, is we had an opportunity to select somebody that would take us where we wanted to go. And so that fell on us to kind of make sure we did that.
Awesome. And we got one more question. What was the biggest challenge for the team as you gathered to address equity?
This is probably the third institution where I have done this type of work. And the same thing occurs at every institution. And part of that is debunking the data. And that, oh, that can't possibly be true, or, wanting to continue to do the status quo to address a evolving problem or a widening gap. And it takes very courageous, stern leadership to navigate through that. And, you've got to try to bring people along. But at some point, we've got to move forward so that, we can start to address those gaps. But that's really the common challenge. And that sense of urgency is probably a phase where you could get stuck and spend a lot of time because of, people not wanting to hear the data. It's 11:04, but I want to tell you a quick story. I was doing some consulting work in this space, and me and the consultant, we put up this data at this institution, and we said, look at this institution, and showed them the data. And everybody in the session said, oh my God, oh, they should close that place down. Oh, that is awful. And we said, well, this is your data. And they just could not, that was the only way to present it in a way where they saw, oh, this, where they could believe. And it still, was a struggle moving forward, but it's usually really wrapping your minds around the data and understanding where you stand in comparison to benchmark institutions or national averages. And we just recently learned as an executive team, and we put it into practice at in-service, that with data, you can appeal to the brain, but with voices, you can appeal to the heart. And so we went out and videoed students and said, what has your experience been like here? And there was some, interesting responses. Everybody raved about our faculty, the support services, but they also pointed to where they're not real comfortable or great about being virtual, where they're not really they wish they had a plan because they don't know what they don't know. That's from their voice. And I think we got to put the data, the quantitative with the qualitative, and we're developing a plan of action.
All right.
Great.
I'm sorry. Whoever wanted to go ahead.
No, I was just saying great. I know we're running up against time, but we wanted to thank you for the opportunity and thank our chancellor for joining us and leading the way as we transform this diversity, equity, inclusion space at Metropolitan Community College.
Thanks to our team. Takes
Uh,
a village.
I just want to say thank you to you guys. This was the session I was going to attend, even though I ended up moderating it, so it worked out perfectly. It was great to meet you all. I really would hope to talk to you all soon because this is just right up my alley. But I just want to say also thank you to the audience for great questions and participation. We have the legislature panel in 3 minutes now, so if you want to grab a snack, coffee, whatever, be sure to join us back there at 11:10 for the legislature. And it's going to be full of great information. And also, I have the link to the agenda in the chat if you need it again. Once again, thank you to our presenters, and thanks for everyone for the great questions and participation. See you soon.